them all what I'm made up. Strut down the hall, won't stop till I get enough.
Imagine the weight of being president. You know, the world is constantly shifting. There are dangers, opportunities. How do you even begin to get the information you need for these huge decisions?
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
And that's really where the intelligence community steps in. And, well, at the core of that is the president's daily brief, the PDB.
Right, the PDB. And that's what we're really zeroing in on in this deep dive President Trump's engagement with it since he came back into office in January 2025.
Exactly. And our main source for this is a pretty detailed Politico analysis. They looked at his public schedule, talked to current and former intelligence folks. Gives us a good picture.
So the big question we're trying to unpack is, how does his current way of dealing with these briefings stack up against his first term, and I guess against how other presidents have done it?
And importantly, what might the effects be? What are the potential implications of any changes we're seeing?
Okay, but before we get into all of that, maybe we should just quickly clarify what the PDB actually is.
Good idea. So think of it as the intel community's best summary of the really pressing national security challenges facing the U.S. It's not just one thing either.
How's it delivered then?
Well, there's usually an in-person briefing, with intelligence professionals actually talking to the president. And there's also a written document. People often just call it the book.
Okay, the book. And it's not just like background reading, right? It has a real purpose.
Absolutely. It's meant to give the president what they need for, say, high-stakes diplomacy, or to really understand what other governments are thinking, what they might do.
So anticipating things.
Yeah, avert strategic surprises, and also, crucially, just deliver the blunt facts. Objective information, no matter the politics.
Okay, got it. So with that baseline, let's dive into the numbers that Politico found.
Right. So the analysis highlights this key statistic. Since January 2025, President Trump has reportedly sat for only 12 of these in-person PDB presentations.
12, just 12. That definitely catches your attention, especially when you compare it to his first term.
It does. Because the reports back then indicated that for a lot of that first term, he was meeting with intel officials twice a week for these briefings.
Twice a week then versus, well, much less now. Do we have more specifics from the first term?
Yeah, the analysis points to the first 5 weeks of 2017. Back then, it was an average of about 2.5 briefings a week.
2.5.
It did settle down later in the term, more like an average of 2 per week.
Yeah.
But still, that's a pretty significant difference from what we're seeing now.
And how does the current term break down month by month?
So Politico reported 2 in-person briefings each month for January, February, and March. Then it apparently picked up slightly to about once a week in April and May.
Okay, so even the recent increase is still below that first-term average. It paints a picture of a definite shift.
It does. And it's not just analysts noticing. Senator Mark Warner, who chairs the Senate Intelligence Committee, he's voiced concern.
What did he say specifically?
He basically said the low number of briefings is worrying. It suggests maybe that the expertise of the intelligence community isn't being valued as much, and that could leave the U.S. More vulnerable to threats.
That ties into some existing chatter about Trump's governing style, doesn't it? That act first, evaluate later idea.
It does seem to align with that narrative. And these in-person briefings, they're seen as valuable because they offer that direct channel. Right. The president can hear detailed assessments, get updates on, sensitive covert ops.
And get unfiltered information, right?
Yeah.
Even if it's not what policy advisors might want to hear.
Exactly. That's a key part of the intelligence community's job. I mean, we're talking about an $80 billion a year operation across different agencies using human intelligence, signals intelligence, all sorts of things, all aimed at keeping leaders informed.
Makes sense. I saw a quote from a former CIA analyst, the Central Intelligence Agency, that is. Mm-hmm. They basically said the whole point of this huge intel service is to inform the president, to help stop those big strategic surprises. It's about that direct link.
And Larry Pfeiffer, he was chief of staff to CIA Director Michael Hayden. He really emphasized the unique role of the briefers themselves.
Oh, yeah. What did he say?
He highlighted their ability to deliver, quote, hard truths. Nuanced information that hasn't been, massaged or filtered through a policy lens first. That raw perspective can be vital.
Okay, so we have the number showing a drop, and we have these concerns being raised by people like Senator Warner and former officials. Yeah. But It's fair to say presidents handle this stuff differently, right? There isn't just one way.
Oh, absolutely. Presidential habits vary a lot. George W. Bush, for instance, liked daily briefings, wanted that back and forth with analysts.
And Obama.
Obama reportedly put more emphasis on reading the book very thoroughly, though the Politico piece notes he still got in-person briefings quite often in his first term.
How often?
Around 44% of the days, apparently, which works out to multiple times a week. And funnily enough, he actually got some criticism back then for not attending more often.
Interesting. So even multiple times a week drew criticism then. What about President Biden?
His pattern seems to be more like 1 or 2 in-person briefings a week. But the key difference highlighted is his consistent engagement with the written PDB, the book, and using that for deeper talks with his team.
Right. And that brings us to a really significant point about President Trump that Politico raises.
Which is?
That he is, and I'm quoting here, known not to read the accompanying written document, the book.
Yeah. And that's a major concern for Intel folks because the book contains so much of the detail analysis, the context, the nuance.
So potentially a lot of crucial information might be getting missed if the book isn't being read and the in-person briefings are infrequent?
That's the worry. Although it was also reported during his first term that briefers adapted. They found he responded better to visuals, graphics, maps.
A more storified approach, I think I read?
Exactly. Kind of telling the intelligence story rather than just presenting dense text. So there was adaptation.
Okay, and the White House now, they have a response to these low numbers, right?
They do. Spokesperson Davis Ingle pushed back, saying the president is, quote, constantly apprised and regularly in touch with his national security team.
Implying the information gets to him regardless of the formal PDB count.
Yes. Arguing the intel community actively keeps him informed in real time. Their point is that the formal PDB meeting isn't the only way intelligence flows.
Who else gets briefed?
Well, top national security aides, cabinet secretaries, they also receive similar briefings, and the argument goes, they can relay important stuff to the president.
And there were other points, too, weren't there, about different kinds of briefings?
Yes, someone described as familiar with Trump's briefings said he gets separate, standalone briefings on specific global hotspots. Things outside the regular PDB.
And that he just calls officials directly.
Reaching out ad hoc for updates throughout the day. And another spokesperson, Brian Hughes from the NSC, said Trump has multiple high-level national security briefings every day, but they vary in scope.
So the White House picture is one of constant, varied interaction, not necessarily reliant on that one formal PDB meeting structure.
Right. And look, it's true that intelligence can reach the president in other ways. Standalone memos, deep dive articles based on intel. The PDB isn't the only vehicle.
But, okay, let's talk potential consequences. If he is relying more on his top advisors to filter or relay the intelligence, does that raise questions?
It does. The big one is, would those advisors, who are often political appointees with policy goals, be as willing or, frankly, as able to deliver those really uncomfortable, hard truths that career intel briefers are trained to give?
Especially if those truths clash with the president's own views or policies.
Exactly. There's a potential filtering effect there. That's the concern.
The Politico piece also mentioned something about access to the report.
Yeah, it reported tighter restrictions now on who actually gets to see the full intelligence report.
Yeah.
Which could mean fewer people in the administration have that comprehensive, big-picture view from the intel community.
And then there's the factor of personnel changes. We saw the recent ousting of National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. Does that kind of turnover affect things?
It absolutely can.
Yep.
Instability in key national security roles can definitely disrupt the flow of information and, maybe more importantly, the understanding and consistent handling of that intelligence within the White House.
It feels like those formal PDD sessions, when they happen, offer something unique then. It's not just about him receiving info, is it?
No, it's a two-way street, ideally.
Yeah.
It's a chance for the president to ask questions directly, to push back, to give feedback.
And for the intelligence agencies to learn what's on his mind.
Precisely. One former senior official was quoted saying, "We learn too during those sessions. It helps them understand the president's priorities, what he needs more information on. It helps them tailor their work."
That feedback loop sounds pretty vital.
It really can be.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. If we synthesize everything we've discussed in this deep dive, what are the main takeaways?
Well, first, there's clearly a significant drop in President Trump's formal in-person PDB attendance compared to his first term. That's the headline number.
And that drop has definitely caused concern, right? From Congress, from former intel officials. worries about undervaluing expertise and potential vulnerabilities.
Definitely. But then you have the counter-narrative from the White House. They insist he's being kept constantly informed through other channels, his advisors, ad hoc calls, specific briefings.
So it's not necessarily that he's uninformed, but the method of information transfer has changed, or at least the reliance on the traditional PDB has lessened.
Exactly. But questions remain about the effectiveness of those other channels, especially regarding the delivery of potentially unwelcome truths and the reported lack of engagement with the detailed written PDB.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener. Thinking about how complex national security is and acknowledging that presidents consume information differently. What do you think are the truly critical elements needed to make sure a president is effectively informed?
And what role does or should the formal president's daily brief play in that whole process? Does it need to be central? Or are these other methods just as good, maybe even better for certain leaders?
Yeah, what fundamental questions does this whole situation raise for you about that crucial relationship between intelligence, the gathering and analysis of it, and presidential leadership itself? Something to think about.
Sound the alarm. I'm coming up. We'll have the ball. I'm sweet like a buttercup. You're a Barbie doll. Show them all what I'm made of. Strut down the hall. Won't stop till I get enough.